Um, my name is Justin Mendy, and I'm the founder and CEO at Remedic, and I will be moderating the discussion today. Joining me, I have Metin Kortak and Rob Picard. I will allow you both to introduce yourselves and give a brief explanation of what you do. Metin, would you like to start?
Thanks, Justin. Hi, everyone. My name is Metin. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer here at Remedic. Remedic is a leading cybersecurity firm. We build and manage information security and data privacy programs for modern SaaS businesses, and we leverage compliance automation tools like Vanta as our foundational tool for these programs that we develop.
I'm Rob Picard. I'm the security lead at Vanta. Vanta builds software that automates security and compliance.
Thanks, guys. Really, I want to dive into the relationship between Remedic and Vanta. So a lot of startups and SaaS businesses require continuous monitoring and compliance monitoring and a dedicated cybersecurity team to assist them with obtaining their certifications for becoming compliant with various frameworks. Leveraging Vanta and Remedic, customers will have access to a 24/7 dedicated cybersecurity team and an automated platform for monitoring their cloud security posture. Today's topic for discussion is going to be modernizing your security programs and boosting your bottom line. We'll discuss the differences between modern SaaS security and legacy systems while also focusing on strategies to create forward-looking approaches to security and meaningful benefits that it can bring to your organization. To kick off the discussion, let's dive into defining modern security programs and SaaS security programs versus legacy systems. I'll start today with our first question. What is the difference between a modern SaaS security program and legacy systems? Metin, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and give an answer on that. So we work with a lot of both like legacy businesses, and we also work with a lot of modern SaaS businesses that are using cutting edge technology, using hosting providers. And I think the biggest difference that we have seen comparing these two types of businesses is really how they are hosting their product, their application, or whatever service that they provide. The reason for that is because a lot of the legacy businesses that we work with, they host their databases, their servers, and other infrastructure either on site, in their office spaces. And that brings up a lot of challenges, both from a compliance standpoint and also from a cybersecurity standpoint. These companies have to worry about their electrical issues. They have to worry about fire safety. They have to worry about CCTV, and just really hosting that in their own data centers or in their office space. That really makes the auditing process very difficult. And it also makes security pretty challenging because when you're hosting everything on your own, all of the physical infrastructure is owned in your data centers or in your office spaces. That means you most likely have to procure a lot of third-party systems to help you secure that application. On the other hand, with the modern SaaS businesses, majority of those are hosted in the cloud. They go to hosting providers such as AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, and that really cuts down the cost of physical security and also physically managing their databases and their servers. These hosting providers provide a lot of built-in security and redundancy to these applications, and that makes the auditing process a lot easier by providing automation tools, ability to integrate, and other systems. And with all these built-in systems, you're able to run a lot of your security controls without needing to procure majority of them by like using third-party systems.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I would add to it used to be that the attack surface for a company, such as a general B2B company, was like their network and sort of their physical premise, or their MS Exchange server. Right now, I feel like the modern security programs and the modern SaaS businesses, your attack surface is essentially your endpoints, so your people's machines, and the SaaS access that they have, including, if you bucket like AWS into the SaaS bucket, right? Which, I mean, it's not, but it's a console, right? There's a place that you go to log in. It's a username, password, 2FA, all these things. And I think like that's where now security programs are focused, is how do I make sure that access is appropriate so that I don't have 100 people who have access to AWS instead of one person with the same, ability to do our business. How do I make sure that I'm putting that data into reliable, secure SaaS providers? And how do I make sure that people's endpoints are not being compromised, right? Like, how do I make sure that we have good anti-malware practices, endpoint detection and response, these sorts of things? So I think that that's a big change in terms of what modern companies look like versus legacy. I would also add there, just kind of in terms of the culture that the security team projects into the company. I think in the past, you'd see much more of a I guess, dictatorial sense, right? And I think people often had a combative relationship with their security team because the security team said, like, this is the lay of the land, this is the law, you have to do this because that's just what the best thing to do is. Therefore, everybody has to do that. And I don't care what the impact is on your ability to do your job well. I think now, though, there's much more of a sense growing in the industry that, hey, like, our job is to enable the business to move quickly without, breaking too many things, at least not breaking the important things. And how can we do that? So I think agility is a big part of it, making sure that your security program can adapt to the environment as opposed to trying to force the environment to adapt to the program. And I think flexibility, right? So being able to say, like, hey, I understand that, we might be taking on some risk by using a new data warehouse provider. Hey, we want to add Snowflake or Databricks or something like that into our stack. That's going to add risk. And I could say, no, we have to use this provider, AWS, because that's what our other stuff is in. Or I can say, all right, let's evaluate that risk. Let's do security evaluations of these vendors. Let's make sure that security is on board with how we're configuring them. Maybe we need to learn new things on the security team that we haven't had to deal with before. But we need to be flexible and understand the actual benefit of the work we're doing and the controls that we're putting in place. Otherwise, we're just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that people don't question it too much.
Great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate your answers. I think that makes sense and kind of feeds into our next question here, which, with a modern SaaS business, what are some of the concerns that come with a modern SaaS business when it comes to security and compliance?
I'll start off with that. Thank you. I think one of the biggest concerns that a lot of our clients bring to us is always compliance and certifying these compliance frameworks. Especially recently, I think this has become like a very big factor in purchasing new security tools, working with cybersecurity companies like us, and customers just want to become compliant. And I think one of the main pain points is that as they're utilizing a lot of these cloud SaaS solutions with their product, that brings up the concern around continuous monitoring, because that becomes very difficult to do. They have a lot of systems that they're using. They have their identity provider, they have their hosting provider, and they have their product. And that's difficult to monitor. And one of the pain points that a lot of our customers bring to us is that how can we monitor these SaaS platforms from one place?
Yeah, I think, one of the concerns that I think often comes up is just like, how much work is this going to be, right? Like, how much is this going to distract me from the actual job that I have to do, proving to some random third party that I'm doing what I said? And it kind of goes to your point there, like how much of it is I guess I would say it's like a black box, right? It's like, I don't have any idea what I'm about to get into here. I don't know how those conversations with auditors are going to go. I don't know if they're going to harass me about a person who took an extra day to enable two-factor 3 years ago, or is it something that I don't have to think about because it was 3 years ago? So I think the biggest concern that I see is just I don't understand what I'm getting into. It's sort of the uncertainty of it all. And I think being able to sort of shine a light on that and say, hey, auditors, you can just talk to them, and you can often say hey, we have this control, we weren't quite meeting it the way we expected, and they can work with you to say, okay, well, maybe you should replace that with a different control that you feel is more appropriate for your business. I think the same often applies to security. It's just like a big black box, right? It's I don't know what all I'm supposed to do. I don't know what the good looks like. I don't know what kind of good enough looks like. And I think trying to, what I try to do is just provide resources or links and that kind of stuff to say hey, this is a good example of what you need to be ready for with SOC 2. There's the Latacora SOC 2 starting 7, right? Which is a fantastic blog post out there that just says if you do these things, you're in pretty good position with security and you're ready for SOC 2, at least to get started. I think stuff like that, just good entry-level resources that tell you just, okay, I want to demystify what I'm getting into here. You know, and I'm sure like Remetic deals with that with a lot of customers when you first start talking about compliance.
Yeah, I think like a lot of our customers, when they start working with us, they do not understand what type of frameworks that they have to comply with. Most of the time they do it because like one of their clients requested it. But then as we work on more projects with them, we realize that, oh, wow, you're processing, I don't know, personal data from the European Union. And now we have to actually get you compliant with GDPR. You're processing health data. We have to get you compliant with HIPAA. And they don't really find out about a lot of these things until they start working with a security professional who actually has knowledge on these compliance areas.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting too, because there's another dimension to all of this, which is like, you know, in terms of concerns that I might have, right? There's, okay, so my customer said I need a SOC 2 audit, right? I don't know what that is. Oh, that entails. I know what it is, but I don't exactly know how to go from A to B there. But then there's like also the question of like, do I need one from like a big four? Do I need Deloitte to come audit me, or do I need maybe a smaller firm? Is my customer going to like care who I went with? And it's kind of the same for security with like your customer might ask for a penetration test, and you might say like, well, I can go get, you know, something that's very, very inexpensive from somewhere, but like it starts me off, gets me off on the right foot. I can go to you know, kind of like no name random provider that maybe is actually going to like backfire, where they're going to say there's a bunch of critical findings, but like they're really not that important, but they won't work with you to be like, yes, obviously this is not really a critical finding. You guys just couldn't find anything better. And I think the same applies here. So helping like customers to navigate that is I think like something that comes up a lot. Hey, you need something with like this amount of rigor, but like this amount of reputation. I think that kind of stuff is also a big concern. Will my customer or will my prospect accept this?
Nice. Thanks, guys. On the flip side of that, I would say, what are some of the benefits of compliance?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll kick this one off if you don't mind.
Yeah,
I think there are benefits, right? Like, I think it's not just checking boxes. I think one is if this is your first touch point for the security world, it's a baseline, right? Like we could argue all day about specific requirements and specific frameworks, and this one's dumb, or this one's not really that useful, or this one should be better, or this one's good. But like at the end of the day, if you do it, you're in a better place than if you hadn't done it and you hadn't done something else, right? So I think, you know, a very mature security organization doesn't necessarily base their security requirements on a compliance framework. They sort of translate their security into a compliance framework in order to prove it to a given, you know, set of auditors. But I think starting off, like there's a huge benefit to just having a baseline that says, if you do these things, they're actually pretty reasonable. And like you can like optimize here or there and start to iterate from there. But like it's a great first step. And the other thing is it helps you sell to people. And I think that's like the most important thing. Like if a customer, if somebody came to me and they're like, hey, I want to use Vanta because we want to SOC 2, like my first question is like, well, who asked for it? Like, why? You know, I think if somebody's not asking for a SOC 2, don't go and spend the money and the time on a SOC 2. But there are probably other, like maybe go take a look at NIST CSF, right? Like that's a pretty good starting point to start thinking about security and understanding like where you should start. So I'd say like start with just best practices, that kind of stuff in that case. But overall, I think there's just a lot of benefit to proving to customers in a very easy way. Once you actually do the work and you just hand them a report, that conversation ends. That's really, really nice. That's very, very helpful. And then also, yeah, it just provides a good baseline.
Yeah, I think we can both agree that it really improves your visibility and your ability to serve more customers as you become more compliant. Like I think one of the examples is FedRAMP compliance. You want to serve to government institutions. You want to work with the United States government. You have to become FedRAMP compliant. But what happens after you become compliant? You get to be present on the FedRAMP marketplace. That means if the government institutions require your services, you have that type of visibility. Very similar to things like HIPAA. If you want to work with healthcare institutions, if you want to serve healthcare institution companies, you have to be HIPAA compliant. But when you do, that really, I think, increases your visibility around that and eventually sales. And I think like security is definitely like a big part of it. Of course, compliance helps you with security, but I think a lot of the customers, they choose to do compliance because really it helps them expand their businesses also.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And even like internally at Vanta, right? Like when we finally went and got like an ISO 27001 you know, audit and certification, all that kind of stuff, you know, a year plus ago. it was because we were expanding our international footprint, partially to dog food our own product, right? That's important, just given the nature of our product. But also it's like, well, no, we actually want to go sell to people in Europe, and they're like, what is a SOC 2? I don't care about that. Do you have this cert? So I think as you expand into markets, understanding what is important in that market. If you're coming from another country and expanding into the US, SOC 2 really helps. If you're expanding into other countries like the rest of the world, a lot of countries, expect to see an ISO cert, 27001. Same goes for like GDPR compliance, like you mentioned earlier. If I'm expanding into Europe or I'm starting to process the data of, European or EU citizens, like I need to start thinking about GDPR compliance, and it's going to let me expand comfortably into that market because people ask about it in the sales process. This is like, it is very much a firm part of all of the processes now, right? It's not like okay, you don't have it, well, that's okay. It's no, you have to represent like exactly what you do for a bunch of questions regarding privacy when you start to expand into certain areas. And that's even becoming more common in the US, of course, with CCPA, CRPA, all the new compliance regulations there.
Great, thanks, guys. Rob, for this next question, why don't you kick us off with this one, since this is a really big part of Vanta, but why is automation important for compliance?
Yeah, so before you start thinking about automation, like what does a SOC 2 process look like, or generally like a security audit look like, right? A SOC 2 ISO. Generally speaking, like you say, I have this set of controls, and the auditor looks at that and they say, okay, that's a reasonable set of controls. That's kind of a SOC 2 type 1 in a very, very like naive way, right? It's like they say, this set of controls, if you did all these things, like, yes, you would be in line with the expectations of the framework, right? Like for SOC 2. But then there's the part where they actually say, okay, now prove that over some period of time, your observation like window, like you actually did these things. And they would say, okay, you have an offboarding control that says you remove people from systems within a day of their offboarding from the company, right? So then they'll say, okay, well, over this 3-month period, 6-month, 12-month period, give me the list of all the people who are offboarded, and you give them that list. And then they do a random sampling from that list, and they say, go show me screenshots from all of your systems that are in scope that show that this person was offboarded within a day of that date, right? And then you package all those up and do a drive, and then you would share that with them, and then they would review every one, and they'd say, can you add one for this? And that's one control. That's one specific example. You would do this for like the 80 to 120 controls that you actually have, and you would have drives full of thousands of screenshots, right? There's another great blog post, I think from fly.io, that's called "The Screenshots Will Continue Until Security Improves," right? It's just, that's what it looks like when you do a manual SOC 2. When you automate, like if you can provide an automated way for the customer or for the person or the company being audited to share that evidence with an auditor and show like, hey, you don't actually have to ask for sampling. We got all the samples. We showed that in all of the cases that we did this thing. We actually have controls in place to tell us that we didn't do that thing in time, in real time. Then you can shorten that audit cycle by a very long period of time. And you can kind of like get to a point where your auditor is sort of working with your automation, and you don't really have to deal with it that much on a manual basis. They'll interview for you a couple times. They'll talk about certain things. They'll say, this thing didn't seem to work out. What happened there? And you can say, oh no, that didn't, or like, hey, that actually, here's some other evidence for that. But it just shortens the manual workload by a very large amount.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of our first customers that had to become SOC 2 Type 2 compliant. And at that time, Vanta wasn't even out there. And we had to go through a very manual SOC 2 audit process. And it has almost taken us like 3 months just to like collect the evidence, because auditors would come to us. They would ask us, hey, we need to see evidence for all of these servers. We need to see evidence that you haven't changed your branch protection settings on your source code tool. And it was just like a ton of documents that we had to export from all these systems, provide that to the auditor. And they would always like come back to us with questions, follow up, or if they noticed like an issue or non-compliance during that observation window that we had during the SOC 2 Type 2 audit. And it was just like a very challenging process. After we started using Vanta, and we use Vanta with a lot of our customers, it does make that process very easy, because I think now we have like this central location for all of that evidence. I can just like have the auditor log into Vanta, and then they can check for things like vulnerability scan results, if they have been remediated. if the users that were onboarded completed their policies, their employee awareness training. And I think that greatly helps the audit process. I think that I was able to complete some of the audits within just less than a month with Vanta. And I think that's like a really big bonus of automation, because otherwise the manual work is challenging and time consuming.
Yeah, and I think you can also, if you are in a position where you need to go for multiple certificates or multiple different standards, right? Like SOC 2 and ISO 27001, which is the position, we as a company are in addition to, GDPR and a number of other things, right? You can reuse all that work, right? Like it's hard to, two different auditors for different things might take different samples, but like if it's all just automated, it's all one spot, you just give them both access and it's great. So, I mean, it's like a little bit self-serving as a concept because this is obviously what Vanta does, but I think it really makes a big difference. Like I would never recommend I would recommend somebody go with one of our competitors before I recommend they go and do a manual audit, right? I think it's just so much work.
Nice, thanks guys. On to the next question here. So what can you do to modernize your security programs? Metin, would you like to kick us off here?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So one of the first things that we do to modernize security programs, especially for our clients, is that we work with cloud-based automation tools. Obviously, one of the things that we use is tools like Vanta, because we're able to continuously monitor for any compliance issues. We're able to monitor for vulnerabilities, if the users are correctly onboarded, if they're correctly offboarded. I think that really helps the compliance and the auditing process, because throughout the observation windows that we're having with various frameworks, we're able to understand at what point there was a non-compliance and at what point we were fully compliant. And our goal is to start our audit process in a fully compliant state. I think that's one of the first things. The other thing is that we use a lot of built-in security tools. Just going back to the first question where we were discussing legacy systems using on-prem infrastructure versus modern SaaS businesses using cloud hosting providers. A lot of these hosting providers already provide a ton of security tools. For example, in AWS, there are built-in tools that we can use for intrusion detection. There are built-in tools that we can use for vulnerability monitoring. And there are even some monitoring tools that we can implement in AWS for capacity management and for other security controls. And I think that really helps us manage compliance without needing to use a lot of third-party platforms, because we're just using the built-in systems. And that way we're just relying on AWS and other automation tools to help us become compliant. But yeah, that's one of the first things that we do with automation.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, one of the things I would suggest, especially if, somebody's sort of responsible for security and they're trying to like move forward and like modernize something that's sort of already in like a legacy, like mode, I would say doing a survey of your employees and asking them like what security controls or what security things have gotten in your way or have added friction to your job. That can reveal a lot of stuff you didn't even know you did, right? That can reveal a lot of things where somebody else misinterpreted what security wanted, and then they implemented something and they flipped a switch in some application. And now it's really annoying that this happens every day. I have to go do X, I think being responsive to what employees are saying, like, hey, this is getting in my way and it's kind of minor, but like it's getting in my way, and the same way it's getting my way, it's getting in the way of 100 other people. That can be a really good starting point to say like, okay, our job as a security program is not only to reduce risk, right? Another job of ours is to reduce the friction that we are causing in the organization, right? Like generally, like when we do planning on my team, we talk about like three goals, three outcomes that we want every quarter or every planning cycle. It's reducing the risk of information security incidents, reducing the friction caused by information security controls, and increasing trust in our security program, both internally and externally, right? And I think that having that reduced friction be a goal is a key part of modernizing a program, right? Because you have to start somewhere. I think more tactically speaking, it's like doing a survey is great. I would say doing like a really realistic threat model as an exercise, not as like an artifact, is good. And what I mean by that is you can like spend weeks putting together a really like detailed document that says this is our threat model, and then like every month you go back and update that document as your threat model changes. I don't think that's the most useful way to spend your time. I think what's really useful though is taking the time, an hour, 2 hours with the correct group of people throughout the company and saying like, all right, if I was going to attack our company, what's the easiest thing I could do? Maybe it's like mailing malware to somebody's email. Like then you start to think, okay, what would catch that? Do we have proper antivirus? Like, do we have anything on our email protection? I think doing a very realistic and just pragmatic threat model that actually gets everybody on the same page about what it is that could happen. And like, hey, did you know if somebody ran malware on our computers, like they could get into our bank account? Like, oh, I didn't know that. Like, wait a minute, why do all these people have access to our bank account? Like, wait, do they have two-factor? Is that even an option? You can start to have these conversations, and it ends up being super practical and gives you a really like grounded place to start when it comes to planning your security program, right? As opposed to just saying like, I'm going to come and I'm going to like, put the hammer down and say, we're not doing any of X or any of Y or any of Z. You can actually say like, guys, it's terrifying that like this thing is a problem. And you should never start your security program from a place of fear. But sometimes it's important that you all see that like, okay, like we all actually agree on what the real risks are here. So I think that's a very practical piece of advice as well.
Yeah, I think like especially the recent data breaches and security incidents that are out there, majority of them have been happening because like someone has clicked on a wrong link or like they did something that they weren't supposed to. And I think that's where the phishing exercises really come into play. And we have conducted a couple like phishing exercises for our customers, and like it's really surprising how people would like click on any links that they would get in their emails. And I think increasing that awareness is definitely like a big step in ensuring that you have a good security program, because even if you have like covered everything from compliance, you have implemented all these security controls in your hosting provider, in your application, there is still a human risk that's involved. You are essentially trusting your employees with very critical privileges. And it all just like depends on whether they like click on the right or the wrong link that they get in their email, and they can potentially compromise your company's databases.
And I would add on to that too. I think one of the assumptions you have to make as a security program is that people are going to click the link, right? And I think what you see sometimes out there is like, hey, why was it that somebody clicking a link resulted in this entire breach, or one mistake resulted in the entire company's compromise? And I think that's a failing of the security controls, right? Sort of blast radius reduction is a really important part where you say, hey, I assume people are going to like log into their personal email on their work machine, right? Like that's just something people do. And we could spend a lot of resources technically like controlling that. Or we can say, let's make sure that somebody logging in on their personal email doesn't destroy our security model, right? And sort of baking that into the model. So I think, yeah, like you're right. People are going to click the link. People are going to, download the thing. They're going to like click on an ad for Flash Player instead of the real Flash Player. It's going to be malware. And so making sure that you actually like are taking into account, hey, it's not just like insider threat isn't just like somebody going rogue. It's also considering like, hey, if somebody gets compromised, what does that actually mean for the company? And can we focus our efforts on reducing that blast radius and making sure we can detect and remediate that, as opposed to, just saying like, the only thing we can do is prevent them from clicking the link. Because to your point, like that's just never going to happen.
Nice. Thanks, guys. Why don't we go ahead and move on to our next and final question before we open it up to the audience questions. Why do modern SaaS companies need a dedicated cybersecurity team? Metin, do you want to start us off here?
Yes. So one thing that I get from a lot of my customers and a lot of the people that we meet in the industry is that they think that compliance is just a check the box type of an effort. And they assume that like, oh, I just have to implement these controls from SOC 2. I have to implement these controls from ISO 27001. And once I get my certification, it's over. But unfortunately, it's not. Compliance is a very continuous effort. It is something that you have to monitor on a day-to-day basis. You may get, for example, security incidents from different resources. You may get vulnerabilities. You may notice that your engineering team onboarded a bunch of like new resources, and suddenly someone has to ensure that those resources are complying with the security controls. So Without a dedicated cybersecurity team, it becomes very time consuming to continuously monitor that for you and implement all of these security controls on like new resources that are being released by your engineering team. I get this question a lot from my customers. They're like, okay, well, we are now certified. Why would we need these automation tools? Why would we need all these security tools that we paid for? And it's always like one of the first things that I have to explain to my customers is that this is something you're likely going to have to do until you no longer want to become compliant. Another thing is that these audits that they go through, they don't happen just once, especially when it comes to SOC 2 and ISO. You have to go through a second audit in the next year. So this is something that you have to do on an annual basis. And especially when it comes to SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, with SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, there are observation windows. That just means the period of time that the auditors will monitor your systems to ensure that you remain compliant. So once you have obtained your SOC 2 Type 2 certification, your reports, that means you now have a new observation window from the time that you obtained your reports until the next year. And that's when the auditors will look at any new evidence of what happened from a compliance standpoint. That's where we can also see compliance status using tools like Vanta, where we can see if the organizations remained compliant throughout that whole year. But the dedicated cybersecurity team is really there to help you make sure that you are always in that compliant phase rather than just having that done last minute right before your audit.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's like three things I would add, right? And I keep on getting myself in a trap where I say three things, and then I'm like, wait, let me make sure I remember all three things I was going to say by the time I get to number three. But first thing is like, not everybody does need a dedicated team, right? Like if you're a really small startup and you don't have a lot of customer data and like people aren't really like evaluating your security, that's not necessarily going to be a requirement for you. But I think a lot of companies can really benefit from it because there is a lot of scrutiny on their security. So the other thing I'd say is like, there's a subject matter expertise that comes with having a dedicated team. That yes, you can assign like work to your team, but there's a point at which you benefit from having a subject matter expert look at that work and say, you actually don't need to do any of that. You just do this one thing over here. Or like, I know this tool, I know like this static analysis tool, you plug that in and you're good to go on like these 5 things, right? You don't have to actually build all this yourself. So I think having a subject matter expert can really be a benefit. And 3, I remember all 3, is actually having, okay, so security is almost always important, but not urgent, right? And that means that everybody agrees like, yes, security is important, but it's very rare that security work becomes urgent. There's like, the audit is happening right now and they said we don't do this, we need to do this right now, or there is a security breach. Holy crap, this is urgent. So if you just expect your team, your company to take security seriously all the time, it's always going to fall by the wayside because it is important but not urgent. Humans across the board are very bad at prioritizing important but not urgent things over less important but more urgent things. And that makes sense because sometimes that's the right thing to do. But when you have a dedicated group focused on security, you're making an investment in saying this is important regardless of the urgency at any given point in time. Because when it does become urgent, I really want the past 5 years to have been focused on making investments to make it less of a problem. So I think that's the third thing that I would put out there.
I agree. I think it's also the peace of mind that comes with it. Like a lot of our customers, if they don't have the security team, they're helping them. Maybe they know how to implement some of these like security controls for compliance, but like maybe one day they'll have a security incident or a data breach, or they'll have an outage, and they really need some experience on that level because they need to understand like how they have to respond to that incident, what the best practices are for remediating that incident and ensuring that it doesn't happen again in the future. And I think having a dedicated cybersecurity team on site with them helps them have some type of a peace of mind because now they know who to go to when they have a security incident. They know who to go to when they get security questionnaires from their customers. And this happens a lot for a lot of our customers. They know what to do if they get like some different requests from their auditors because the frameworks get updated For example, recently the ISO framework was updated, and now that's going to be rolled out to all of these auditors, and companies need some type of an expertise on that to help them with these ongoing challenges.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And the one thing I'd add there is it's peace of mind for them, but also for their customers. And that's fantastic for reducing friction in the sales process.
I agree. We get a lot of meeting requests from our customers of customers because they want to meet with our customers' security team. And when we get on calls with them and we're able to answer all of their like compliance related questions, all the controls that we've implemented, it really helps the sales process and help them expand their businesses.
Great. Thank you, guys. This was certainly insightful. I think we'll go ahead and open it up to audience questions now. So just a reminder for everyone who is attending, you can submit any questions using the Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen. Let me take a look here. Okay, our first question. How can security teams help implement a security-focused culture? It seems like it's hard to get teams to understand the importance and benefits of security. I don't know who wants to start us off here.
I'd love to kick that one off. It is hard, right? Because it's a communications problem. It's hard to communicate when you are a subject matter expert and you understand the risk and sort of this concept of importance, but not urgent, and that sort of thing. It's hard to actually like communicate that to an entire company, right? So I think the biggest thing that the biggest tactic or the tool that I have found here is almost always saying yes when given the opportunity to say yes or no to something, right? Almost always meeting your coworkers where they are and saying, hey, okay, you want to do XYZ, or you need to do this, that, and the other for the business, or this is just going to make your life better. Let's find a way to get to yes here instead of trying to say, you know, hey, like no is the only acceptable response here, because there are times when you have to say no, and that carries so much more weight and understanding when you've said yes 100 times before that, right? When you've worked with people and you've accepted that, like, you know, we're going to take on a little risk here, but my job is not to, you know, eliminate risk. My job is to manage it, to reduce it. It's to meet people where they are and say, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm going to work with you to like make this happen in the least risky way possible. Then when you actually say something matters, people understand this really matters because they never say no, right? Or they almost never say just like, no, we can't do this.
Metin, do you have anything for us?
Yeah, I think for like having a security focused culture, awareness is very important. I think that conducting security awareness trainings, phishing exercises, and always just like communicating to your employees, all of the security controls, the policies. I think that's like one of the first things to improve and create a security focused culture. With a lot of our customers, like when we conduct security awareness trainings or phishing exercises, we suddenly start receiving a lot more emails from our customers' employees about phishing emails that they received, or they get concerned about certain pop-ups that are happening on their computers. And that's because they're listening to our advice and they're listening to the security trainings that they have gone through. Because in those trainings, we recommended them, hey, if you see like a random pop-up on your computer, that's not normal. You should probably like check with security to make sure it's not like a malware. If you get a random phishing email, you don't want to click on any links, you should forward that to your security team. We create these recommendations and build processes so that our customers can reach out to us and then we can manage it for them. And I think that really helps create a security focused culture, because now the employees are more aware of what to do when they face security challenges.
You know, I'd actually add on to that too, because I think that's a great point, is sort of increasing awareness. One thing that we kind of recently started doing internally at Vanta is, you know, when things happen in the security world, right? A breach happens and we learn like exactly what led to that and this, that, and the other. We actually started doing like sort of a little bit of a threat bulletin, like, hey, you know, it's not, you know, something everybody has to pay a lot of attention to, but this information is there for them, and we can kind of put it in front of people and say, hey, like, you know, by the way, we're getting a bunch of phishing emails that are claiming to be our CEO, and they're asking for this type of thing. If you get one of those, let us know, right? And they know, like in the training and all that stuff, that they're supposed to, but having very specific, like, there's a trend in this thing, or this breach recently happened in another company that is similar to ours, so we should be on the lookout for this type of stuff, right? It just puts it like a little bit more front and center in people's minds, and just to say, hey, like we're actually like up to date on what's going on out there. And again, that kind of goes back to, so you can trust that when we say that this is important or that is important, it's not based on a book I read in the 90s. It's based on, hey, this is actually happening at other companies. This matters for us, right? So I think, yeah, it just kind of goes to increasing awareness of what's going on in the world.
Nice, thanks guys. On to our next audience question. How long does it take to get compliant with different frameworks? Is it the same timeline for different levels of compliance, or do the timelines vary? So this seems very general. I think we could talk specifically about maybe ISO or SOC 2 frameworks and the timeline that it takes to get compliant with those. I know, Metin, you've built these programs for quite a few people. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think if we're just speaking about SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, it first of all depends on what type of compliance that you want to go with, because there are two compliances for SOC 2 Type 2 or Type 1. So if you want to become SOC 2 Type 1 compliant, that's normally something that you're able to implement within like almost, I want to say, like 2 to 3 months, and then obtain your Type 1 report. However, if you're going with a SOC 2 Type 2 report, your auditors will normally require an observation window of 3 to 6 months. This means that before those 3 to 6 months, you have to implement security controls. You have to be in a ready place so that auditors can monitor your environment, your employees, and other security controls that you've implemented for the duration of that period. So with SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, based on like one of the programs that like we built, we can normally get our customers compliant within just 4 to 5 months. That puts in about like a month of readiness work. And then we enter the observation window. And then on top of that, it's about like a month of just auditing and gathering evidence. So I want to say about like 4 to 5 months minimum to obtain a SOC 2 Type 2 report. If we're talking about, go ahead.
Oh, no, please. I guess I'll just say on the SOC 2 side, anecdotally, I've seen SOC 2 Type 1 compliance in like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If you're already kind of in a good place with that, the biggest part of that is just getting a good set of controls in place. And either an automation platform like Vanta or just your auditors can hand you that. Or I'm sure Remetic has your own set of controls that you kind of use when customers don't come with one. And I think that gets you a lot of the way there. And then it's sort of like, all right, how far are we from being like reasonably in touch with these controls? So I've just seen it be super, super fast on Type 1. And sometimes that unblocks the sale, even if you're like, hey, we're going to get Type 2 in the future. Here's a Type 1 that we'll commit to that in the next month or two.
Yeah, I do see that a lot when customers just get their Type 1 report first. It really helps with the sales process, since it's like a lot quicker to do than a Type 2. There isn't like an observation window set. And especially if the company is like already, if they have like some basic security controls already in place, like encryption at rest, they have their devices encrypted, it's really easy to pass an audit like Type 1. And it also gives a lot of peace of mind to the auditors, because now the auditor already conducted a Type 1 audit. All they have to do is just like monitor your environment to ensure that you are actually keeping those controls implemented in place.
So I think you're going to talk about ISO. Oh, okay, go ahead, please.
I was gonna follow up this with another question actually, and Metin, maybe this is something you can speak to, as you've done this both with and without Vanta. But leveraging a tool like Vanta, do you find that it typically speeds up that readiness time, and you're able to get customers compliant in a shorter window than if you were building a program without a tool like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think without Vanta, we definitely wouldn't be able to implement all of these security controls within 1 month and then enter the observation window, because that without Vanta, that means we have to check on all of the production systems. We have to log into their source code tool. We have to log into their hosting provider. And we have basically no visibility into their compliance status. We don't know where their resources are. We don't know the compliance status on those resources. So implementing something like Vanta, I think it really speeds up the process by giving us more insights into our customers' security posture. So that way, like, we are able to better prepare them to enter the SOC 2 observation window.
Nice. Okay, guys, let's move on here to one of the other audience questions. Once you've achieved compliance outside of the human risk internally, what should these companies be mindful of with third-party vendors? So I guess this would be specific to cloud and SaaS companies.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to take that?
Yeah, so I think with the third-party vendors, after you become compliant, you need to have a good vendor assessment process in place to ensure that the third-party vendors that you're looking to work with are also compliant. So once you become compliant, it kind of creates this like network of like systems and services that are all compliant with the same framework. This applies to things like ISO and SOC 2, because once you achieve that compliance in your policies, most organizations will state something like, if we're conducting a third-party vendor assessment, those vendors have to have an ISO compliance, they have to have a SOC 2 Type 2 report, and once they're going through a vendor assessment process, they have to procure those reports, review them, and ensure that they are actually okay with the organization's standards. So I think that once you become compliant, that vendor process really changes. But I think this is also something that the customers have to keep in mind before they become compliant, because if they're working with some sensitive systems that are not compliant with ISO or SOC 2, those systems are now bringing risk to that organization, and they have to define that well in their information security program if they're going to continue using those vendors.
Yeah. And then I would say too, so from our experience, like with auditors and whatnot at Vanta, a lot of times, aside from, so it gets really like into the sort of wonky, right? Like into the auditor world. But if you become SOC 2 compliant or ISO compliant, like your platform level critical vendors, like AWS, if you're on AWS, generally speaking, like one, they all have the cert, so just go grab them and it's easy. But aside, like they are required, like you need to make sure that they actually have like the same or equal level of like compliance as you. But like if you just kind of are exploring a random vendor that does, low risk stuff, medium risk stuff, but like, stuff like that, or even high risk stuff, you don't necessarily need them to have the same exact cert as you. However, you do need to show the auditor that you did a thorough evaluation of that security, right? So I think to your point, it really does increase the network effect of like how rigorous your security review has to be of vendors. So my advice here would be, when you're thinking about third-party vendors, is stick security in the procurement process before the check is written. Right? If you're not there to gate the money being handed out to a vendor, then it will get bypassed. It's just going to happen. It's going to get dropped, not even maliciously or intentionally. But we implement a very like rigorous security program that is ultimately super lightweight when it comes to new vendors. Right? We send a 12-question questionnaire to new vendors. We request any certificates that they have, ISO, SOC 2, whatever they might have. And then we do an evaluation based on what kind of data and what kind of access they're going to get. Is this a vendor that's going to have production access, right? Is this a vendor that's going to get our customer data? Is this going to get metadata about our customers, metadata about us, our IP, right? We have a sort of a list of things that we use to classify vendors. And then we say, hey, like this is what high risk means, this is what medium risk means, this is what low risk means. And every single vendor that comes through the door goes through this process. Then when we go to our auditors, they trust us because they see our documented process, they see the questionnaire we send out, they see that we are very rigorous about that. And it's okay if a new startup comes out, we want to use them. And even if it's kind of medium risk or high risk, but they don't have SOC 2, our SOC 2 auditors are like, well, that's okay. We can, we can handle that, right? We don't mind that because we know your process is so rigorous. So that's what I would say when it comes to vendors, is just have like a really well documented, thoughtful process, and don't make it too annoying, because if it's annoying, people are going to find ways to bypass it.
I agree. I think I have seen companies have like very strict requirements when it comes to vendor management, where they'll be like, we have to have your SOC 2 Type 2 report, or like there's no deal. And I have seen that happen. And I have also seen vendors just submit like questionnaires, or they conduct like a more rigorous assessment on you. Like they'll send you 300 questions to answer before you can actually like work with them. And I think it's really just to give the vendor some peace of mind. But I think that really just like shows like how strict do you want your security program to be Are you okay with sending manual questions to your vendors and then accepting that? Is that an acceptable form of security to you? Or do you have like a lot higher standards where like you have to have certain reports and certifications before you work with those vendors? And I think that really applies if you are scaling to enterprise, like you're working with larger companies, because those enterprise companies, they definitely have more strict requirements than startups. And I think for those, it's really important to have some of those like reports. But yeah, from like an auditing standpoint, like if you have like a very low risk vendor, a medium risk vendor, it's okay to like not have that report as long as they are still conforming to your standard of security.
Yeah, absolutely. My other piece of advice is very rule of thumb. If your security questionnaire that you're sending out has more than 20 questions, probably could be shorter. I think, we filled out so many security questionnaires that are like 300 questions, and man, they ask the same question 12 times in 12 different ways. And I don't think it's adding security to anybody's company. So good rule of thumb is if you find yourself sending a questionnaire more than 20 or 24 questions, try to find a way to cut it.
I think that's great advice, Rob. Okay, guys, I think we have time for one more question from the audience. This is actually great to kind of wrap things up with. What advice would you give an organization that is exploring SOC 2 or ISO 27001 compliance?
I could kick it off. I think you guys are much more in the weeds on this, Matt, and so maybe I'll just kick it off with my advice and then hand it to you to wrap up. My biggest piece of advice here that I can give you is only do it if it's going to give you money, right? If the money that you're going to get because you did this is more than the time and money you're going to spend doing it, that's the only reason you should go and explore SOC 2 and ISO 27001 compliance. If nobody's asking for it, or you're not about to expand into a new market where people are going to ask for it, not about to move to a certain type of buyer, this, that, and the other, then don't do it, because it's not it's a very, as much as automation helps, and we talked about that, like it is still a time intensive process, and it's a distraction from the most important thing that a business can do, which is make money. Right. I think, if you are not getting more sales as a result of this, then you really, this is like anti-self-serving, but like, don't do it. Right. That's my biggest piece of advice. I think, though, a lot of people just like, you hit that point where like, well, this actually is going to unblock sales for us. So now what to do? And for that, I'll gladly hand it over to Metin.
Yeah, if you do have to become compliant with SOC 2, ISO, or other frameworks, one of my first advices here, and this is something that I do with all of my clients, is that you have to define your scope. You need to understand what you actually need to include in the scope of these audits. Do you have just one product? Do you have more than one products? Do you have more than one hosting providers? Anything that you consider to be production have to be included in the scope. And then you have to define your certain security controls and your security policies. SOC 2 Type 2 is quite a flexible standard. It does allow you to set certain control, and your control language can be customized. So you need to think about what your policies are going to be. Do you need to comply with onboarding requirements within 7 days? Do you want to do that within 14 days? Do you need to remediate vulnerabilities within 30 days? Some of those policies are really going to help you shape your information security program. So you do not want to just dive into the compliance without thinking about some of these security controls first, because once you think about that, it's really going to make it easy for you to implement those controls in the future.
Great. Well, thank you both. I think this has really been insightful, and it's been really great for us to understand and how to modernize security programs and boost your bottom line, as well as talk a little bit about compliance and automation. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Metin. Thank you for all of the attendees for joining today. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and it will be available online and via email in the next week. So thank you everyone for your time, and we look forward to chatting again soon.